All right, here he is.
Wait, let's just talk about blaxploitation for a second, because that's what a lot of people think about. And you are hovering around the 70s, building up to the 70s, and talking about. Do you think that blaxploitation films in general hold up well? I mean, I can watch The Mac and Shaft and Superfly, those three, right now, and have a great time. But the genre filmmaking has moved on quite far from those films. They do look a little dated.
Well, certainly you can say a lot of films look a little bit dated. You can say Dog Day Afternoon looks a little bit dated. They're still using landlines. I mean, so there are moments that I think you take film from its era that you can say that they don't really move well. But you look at stuff like something like the Mac, basically all those fashions are stuff you see on the line from Gucci right now. So you can certainly say that that's lived on and been absorbed into mainstream culture. And that's just one of the things I'm talking about. But also in performance terms, what the Mac does, those great performances, not just by Richard Pryor and Max Julien, but Dick Anthony Williams as Pretty Tony. That's a great performance. I got a chance to ask him about that. And he said, listen, I want to make this a real guy. And this is somebody, to me, I thought of him as being like connected in the same way to Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney. I want him to make that same kind of impact, but to use black street common sense in the way he talks. So he would seem like a real person that we hadn't seen in movies before. But also, I mean, the Mac is a morality tale, Goldie starts the movie coming into town on a bus, and he leaves the movie going out of town on a bus. He leaves with his tail between his legs. And so I think it makes it bigger than that. It's certainly a film noir, I think, certainly in the literal sense, but also in the way that it deals with that sort of demimonde. And just recently, I was in Memphis for the Indie Memphis Film Festival with the film, and I asked they bring Willie Hall, who was the drummer when he was 17, I think, when he started, with the Bar-Kays. And that opening of Shaft, where he's hammering those sixteenths on the hi-hat, but also the backbeat is it hits every time Richard Roundtree takes a step. And I asked him about that. He goes, "Oh my God, yes." He said, "Isaac Hayes bought me a metronome that he put in my bedroom. So every night I fall asleep to the click of that metronome. So when we started playing that song, I did not even have to look up the screen. I knew how to make those hits go so that they matched up with what he was doing." And that film, I just did a Q&A with Tarantino at Town Hall a couple of days ago. And when I first met him, we got into this big argument about Shaft. He said, "You can make a better movie." And he said, I've had a chance to re-examine Shaft, and it's part of the same sort of genre film as Bullet, where it's as much about that guy and the way he inhabits that world as the film itself. So, I think that certainly when you talk about blaxploitation, as often as not, people sort of think, they roll their eyes and go, "Oh, you mean those campy films with all those overwrought costumes and the bad acting, the bad action sequences?" Well, no. I mean, those aren't campy performances. You can't say that Max Julien is not in the Mac. You certainly can't say anything bad about Moses Gunn and Shaft or any of the films we were talking about, or Ron O'Neal. And the example I went to use for Superfly, because this movie I'd actually only ever seen a couple of times, but I remember as a kid seeing that run, and we had got in the documentary. He's running down the street, that chase sequence, the junkie chase sequence, for those who've only heard the record and not seen the movie. He's chasing this junkie, and Ron O'Neal vaults over a 5-foot-tall fence in heels and a suede leisure suit, leaps up onto the fire escape, pulls himself up, and like I said, if you look at the film, you can see his hands shaking from the adrenaline. So it's him and not a stunt person. That's all one sequence shot with the actor and not stunt people. That's astonishing stuff. And the movie is filled with that kind of, inventive guerrilla filmmaking. One of the scenes I've always liked about in Superfly, there's a scene at the end where Priest is driving around town, sort of picking up his ends and about to bounce from into his about to bounce into what becomes Superfly TNT, I guess. And then he double parks to go into a restaurant to pick up some money for somebody. And the camera stays on the outside of the restaurant. It's an exterior shot. And his car is double parked. And I asked Jim Signorelli, who's the DP, I said, "You guys didn't have permits." He goes, "Of course we didn't have permits. Why do you think that car is sitting double parked?" He said, "Because in the movie, it doesn't matter what part of Manhattan you're in, somebody will drive up and park right in front of the building." It's what a friend of mine calls Doris Day parking. There's always parking for the movie star. There's never any parking for Superfly. You think that actually in sort of subtextual terms, makes the movie feel real to you. If you spend any time in New York, you know you can spend an hour driving around a block, just getting around a block, forget finding a parking space. So that all that texture that these movies have, I think elevate them into something more.
Let's talk a little bit about how blaxploitation films, it was a whole huge cultural movement. How did they change Black people of that time? Because you talk about, we were kind of starved for representation before. We got some, and Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte and Dorothy Dandridge are gorgeous portrayals, but they were too few for the time. And even the people then, my mom would be like, we had great stuff, but it was too little. So then all this blaxploitation stuff comes out, and it's there's tons of them. How did those films change Black?
Well, gosh, I mean, you think about, one of the things I say in the movie is that, up until probably the late 60s, if you saw a Black person and a white person in a movie, that was adult entertainment. It wasn't porn. You just saw a Black man and a white woman talking. That was adult entertainment because they might talk about something or touch each other. So, and Sidney existed in these movies by himself. And what I also wanted to do in the film, too, is just show that rather than do those kinds of things that he found demeaning, Harry Belafonte didn't make a movie from 1959 until 1970. He turned down the chance to star in Lilies of the Field because he just thought it didn't work for him. And this is somebody who trained as an actor. If you listen to those songs are basically really monologues. He performs them in character, so to speak. So what these movies did was show a world where Black people had agency. And I was talking about and showed that scene from The Learning Tree for a reason, because you saw a Western and a number of people in the movie, Sam Jackson, Suzanne DePass, Margaret Avery, talk about wanting to see a Black cowboy. And the fact is that, we were as responsible for that kind of thing as anybody else as a people, but you never saw Black people on horses, because in the movie, what does being on horseback sort of denote? That you have some agency. You can go where you want to when you want to go there. And so as a result, you never saw Black people on horses because they didn't want them to have that kind of power on screen. So just what Gordon Parks, again, does at the opening of The Learning Tree lets us know that he's telling us that Black people can have some power over their lives. And to see those movies of that period, or see Sidney Poitier surrounded by other Black people, as you do in Uptown Saturday Night, you go, oh, that's what was missing. That's interesting. And also see him turn his image on its head. He's playing a guy wearing a suit, and the suit seems to be strangling him. It seems to be cutting off the air to his pores. You've never seen Sidney Poitier in a suit not look as comfortable as Cary Grant. In fact, when you see something like In the Heat of the Night, you're thinking, how many suits is he able to pack into that one suitcase? He's got a costume change every time the sun comes up. So these movies offer the reality of Black people being surrounded by other Black people. And one of the examples I've always used is growing up and seeing the old classic movies. You'd see a married couple with twin beds. And I always just thought, wow, white people were crazy. Because you never saw Black people, and certainly my parents didn't have twin beds. That's why there were 9 of us. But you go, how is that possible that this kind of thing existed? And it becomes this sort of thing where you just impute what's not there. Like the joke everybody made about horror films is that Black people were never in them because we always left before it got bad. And even
you're one of
the
9.
Middle of 9.
You're number 4 or 5.
I have a twin sister and a set of younger twin sisters. So yeah, that's me.
So your mother had 2 twins. So that's 6 births
7.
that she had.
Well,
7
times the hospital, but 9 births. Yep. There's a bunch of us. That's
over how long? What's the distance between your oldest sibling and your youngest?
Golly, about 20 years.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. Wow, that's amazing. Let me go here for a second, a little bit off the menu, because you talk about Tarantino, who's one of my favorite filmmakers. But there's a conversation to be had about what is Black film, and it's complicated in music, but I think easier in music than in film, right? I think film is a director's medium, but I think a lot of people look at who's in front of the camera. So now I'm like, that's not necessarily enough. I want to know there's a Black person behind the camera to fully stamp it as a Black film. Now, Django Unchained. He says, I want to make my slavery picture, my Western picture, whatever, my Southern. A lot of people looked at that and was like, well, they were mad about the N-word, but let's put that aside for a second. They're like, there's lots of black people who are telling a slavery type story. And I'm like, but it's a white director. So does that, like, does it not matter? Or like, how do we define that?
Wow, I mean, we're getting into William Styron territory here, aren't we? But I think that so often in these black films in this era, the actors are kind of authors. You know, you can sort of see, again, what Dick Anthony Williams was saying about Pretty Tony in The Mac. Now, that's certainly a film by a white director, but these actors are using their storytelling skills to make these characters real in the way that the directors hadn't imagined. And you can feel this sense of the directors, in some sense, getting out of the way. You can see what Pam Grier is doing in Coffee, the way she's informing that in emotional terms. It makes it bigger than I think. And the director was smart to say she knows what she's doing better than me trying to tell her how to lead the black experience. But, you know, there's the other side of that, too, where I just interviewed Robert Townsend because it's the 35th anniversary of Hollywood Shuffle, which is a movie responding to a way a lot of people of color are treated. He would tell the story about a British director trying to give him black dialect to speak. And no, it's my brother, my onlyest brother. You killed him. And so in cases like that where your authority, your creative authority is usurped by somebody who's trying to tell you how to tell this story, in so many of these cases, the actors, I mean, you can't really tell Jim Brown how to be Jim Brown. If you're a smart director, you don't try to do that. And so you feel what these guys are doing. It's like Larry Cohen telling me about making Black Caesar and wanting to do it because he saw Sammy Davis Jr. on The Tonight Show and saw Sammy doing Edward G. Robinson, saw Sammy doing his gunplay and thought, why not do a remake of Little Caesar with Sammy Davis Jr. in the Edward G. Robinson part? But it fell apart because Sammy had one of his periodic bankruptcies. He goes to American International to try to make the movie, and the head of the studio goes, oh, well, I guess you worked with those people before, so they're okay, right? And Larry goes, I made a movie with one black person. They're like anybody else. What are you talking about? And then the studio head says, well, I owe Fred Williamson a picture. And Larry Cohen goes, Sammy Davis Jr., Fred Williamson. And the studio head goes, give him a limp. But then he recognizes, too, that Fred knows how to tell the story. He told me the story that I wish I'd been able to get into the movie about he said, listen, Fred, when I make these movies, they're low budget. We can't afford a costume designer. Take my credit card and go buy your wardrobe. You know how this guy's going to dress. So Fred comes back, and he's got like 6 suits and 5 sports coats and a couple suede jackets and 8 pairs of shoes. And Larry just kind of swallows hard and goes, well, how much did all this cost? And Fred goes, $400. He goes, you bought all this stuff for $400? And Fred goes, Larry, on me, everything looks good. So that's the actor taking hold of the character, dressing the character literally.